The first thing you need to get into overlanding is a rooftop tent. Obviously, I'm just kidding. Contrary to popular opinion, you don't need to go out and buy a ton of expensive gear and strap it all over the outside of your vehicle in order to get out and enjoy yourself. I see it all too often where people go online like, what do I buy? I want to buy all of the things. And you don't really need to do that. I'm sure everyone's done it. I know I've done it myself, and now I've got a bunch of stuff that kind of sits around not being used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through various aspects of overlanding. I do have some suggestions for things that you probably should get before you go out, and I'll put links to those in the description. And what I've done with this video is I'll split it into those different aspects. I'll put a list of them in the description. I'll put timestamps for each. So if there's something you already have or something you already know about, you can skip through those parts. The best vehicle for overlanding is the one you've already got. Now obviously you need to know its limitations. You can do some kind of light overlanding with a two-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive is obviously ideal, but you can get started with whatever you've got, go out and do the basics, and if you find it's not enough, well, then maybe look into an upgrade. I personally, I've gone through 3 vehicles. My first one was four-wheel drive, but it just wasn't reliable enough. My second one was a fantastic vehicle, and again, I kind of had questions with age and reliability. And now I've ended up with a Toyota 4Runner, and I absolutely love it. I've done a video on some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the 4Runner, so when you get done with this, make sure you give that a watch. There are lots of things to consider when buying an overlanding vehicle, and what suits one person may not necessarily suit another person. One of the things to consider is the compromise between on-road capability and off-road capability. You've got to find the balance. Where something may be excellent off-road, it's going to be terrible on the road. So whatever suits you best and what you want to do best. If you ask a Facebook group which tires are best for overlanding, you can get 200 different people commenting with different suggestions, and they're always going to suggest the exact tires that are on their vehicle. And honestly, there's not a huge difference between all the different brands. If you just stick with a major brand, you can't really go wrong. One thing to consider is whether you go with all-terrain or mud-terrain. I personally go with all-terrains, but I know that there are plenty of people out there who disagree with me and tell me that I'm wrong and that mud-terrains are the way to go. One thing that everyone can agree on though is that airing down helps when you go off-road. Now what you air down to may vary. It depends on the tire, how big your tires are compared to your wheels. Depends on the terrain that you're on. I typically don't go down much below 15 psi for really soft sand or for kind of rock crawling. And if I'm switching between gravel and pavement, if it's bumpy, I may air down to like 20 just to reduce the bumpiness of it some. You can air down just by pushing a key into the valve core, but it takes forever. There are a couple of tools that help to speed that process up. One of those is what I kind of call a rapid air deflator. That is a tool that you screw in and actually kind of it pulls the valve core out and allows the air out a lot quicker. The other option you have is an automatic deflator. Now the automatic deflator is something you just screw into the valve stem and you just leave it. They make a lot of noise and they air down. They're really slow, but you usually get a set of 4 of them in a box. So you put them on all 4 tires at the same time and they all air down at the same time. So in the end, it ends up taking about the same amount of time. With the rapid air deflator, you have to go around and do each one individually. With the automatic ones, you just set them and you go. One of the downsides of the automatic deflators, and the reason why I personally don't use them, is you have to calibrate them before you go out. So you set whatever pressure it's going to go down to, and then when you use them, that's what it goes to. You can't customize it based on the kind of the terrain that you're going to be traveling. When you get back to pavement, you're obviously going to want to air tires back up to street pressure, and there are a huge range of compressors that you can get out there to do that for you. If you go to Walmart, you can pick one up for $10, or you can spend up to about $400 on an air compressor. Now, you don't need a $400 air compressor, but you definitely don't want to be buying the $10 one. Anything that you plug into a cigarette lighter is going to take far too long to air up your tires. I personally use the Revere series air compressors. I really recommend those. They're quick, but they don't break the bank. If you're wanting to get into overlanding and you've not done a lot of camping before, I suggest heading out somewhere either close to home or close to a major town with what you'd consider to be the bare essentials. That way, if you're missing something, you can either run into a store and grab it, or you can run back home and get it. I'd also suggest going out when the weather's nice. You don't want to be freezing or miserable on your camping trip. For camping, you obviously need something like a tent. I don't suggest going out and spending $2,000 on the latest rooftop tent, but get yourself something like a basic but well-made tent. Probably spend around $100 to $200 on a tent. Whatever you get, make sure it has both a fly sheet and decent ventilation. A fly sheet is going to be a sheet that covers the top of the tent. It's a separate layer and it helps keep the dew off and any surprise rain showers. And then a lot of ventilation will allow some airflow through there and stops condensation from building up on the inside. A dome tent is going to be the best value, and you can get a variety of sizes depending on how many people you're with. One thing to consider is when they give those size ratings, they're considering you're going to be packed in like sardines and really close. So if there's a couple of you and you want a little bit of space, go for a 3 or 4 person tent. Don't be tempted by the cheap pop-up tents. They're usually horrible quality, they usually don't have any kind of fly sheet, and they will take you years to put away again. If you do want something that is quick and easy to put up and put away again, I have been very impressed with the Gazelle tents. Now, I don't personally own one and I've never slept in one, but I have checked them out up close and I've helped put them away, and I have been very impressed with the quality of them. They are going to be more expensive than a dome tent, but you can typically find them on like a 20 to 30% off sale. For sleeping, you can usually get by with an inflatable mattress and bedding from home, but if you're going to be out in even the slightest cold, you will want a decent sleeping bag. I've put a link in the description to a Coleman sleeping bag that I use. It is an excellent cold weather sleeping bag and it's great value. If you're shopping around for a sleeping bag and they only give you one number, that is usually what they call the survival rating of the sleeping bag. That means if you're at that temperature, you will just survive the night in that sleeping bag. You will not be comfortable. If they give you 2 numbers, they usually give you a survival rating and a comfort rating, and it's the comfort rating to pay attention to. And just remember that that comfort rating is definitely subjective. When it comes to cooking on the trails, you have a ton of options and everyone's different. I've traveled with people who take an entire kitchen with them. There are people who have a giant wok and they'll do everything on the wok and they'll cook gourmet meals. And I've traveled with people who have a tiny little single burner stove that they use to heat up water for their dehydrated meals. There's nothing wrong with either of them, just pick whatever works best for you. If you're not sure, usually a good versatile choice is going to be a 2-burner stove. For food storage, a simple cooler definitely does the job. I traveled for a couple of years, including some longer trips, using a lifetime cooler, and it did just fine. If you're doing a lot of longer trips, then getting a fridge is definitely a game changer, but it is also a big upfront cost. It's not just the cost of the fridge, which it could be thousands of dollars, but you also have to consider either like a second battery or wiring for it too. If you've not done a lot of trail riding before, or you don't have a lot of recovery equipment, I really recommend going with someone else, and going with someone else who knows the area. You don't want to get caught out by a tough trail or an unexpected mechanical issue when you're alone. Facebook groups are a great way to find people to travel with. You can usually find several Facebook groups for each region of the United States. When you're ready to head out alone, your choices are unlimited as to where to go. I've made a video on how I find places to go and how I plan my routes, and I'll put a link to that. I'll put one in the description and I'll put it at the end of the video. I've also got a list of various routes that you can download across the United States on my website at revereoverland.com/routes. For navigation, I recommend the app Gaia. Gaia will work on your cell phone, whether it's Android or iOS, and it's a great way to either share routes that you have so you can download them off the internet, people can send them to you, you can load them up and you can navigate by them. Or if you're out with someone else for the first time, then you can track that so that if you want to go back by yourself later, you can follow that same route again. Gaia also has a ton of maps available that you can use either in the planning stages or navigating while you're out. Now, Gaia does have a free option, but it's worth going for either membership or premium membership. With both of those, you can download the maps to your cell phone to use offline, and if you're in the woods, you're not going to have cell service. Now, membership's great if you just want the basic functions. You want to be able to navigate, see where you're going, or see where you've been. If you're looking to do some planning and finding campsites while you're out and about, premium membership is well worth getting. You get access to a whole lot more maps, which are really helpful in planning on where you want to go. And you get access to map layers like the public lands layer, which allows you to see where you're in BLM land or national forest land, so you can see where you can camp. Recovery is really important. If you're just getting started, I recommend traveling with someone else who has the equipment already. That way you can see what they've got and what they use. At a very minimum, before I go out, I'd recommend getting a tow strap and a couple of D-rings. If you don't have a rear recovery point, also it's worth getting something to go into the tow hitch, that way you can be pulled out backwards. For your tow strap, I recommend getting ones with the soft hoops at the end, not with the hooks built in. Traction boards can be a nice recovery option as well, but remember you'll need a way of storing them outside the vehicle. Once you've used them, they're incredibly dirty and you don't want that inside the vehicle. You also have a range in prices on the choices of traction boards. You can go for something around $70 on the low end to 3 or 4 times the price for something like Max Trax. I personally have one of the cheap sets and they've worked just fine for the last 2 years, and that's what I'd recommend to someone else as well. You should never just rely on one option for recovery, so what you could do is you could use the money you save on traction boards to diversify your recovery options. You could put some of that money towards a winch, or you could go out now and buy some kinetic rope. And kinetic rope is another great option because that's something that allows you to use momentum in the recovery. It will safely transfer the momentum from your vehicle to the other vehicle. You never want to use a regular tow strap with momentum. A small toolkit is always worth taking with you as well, and you want to make sure that you have your socket sizes and your wrench sizes match some of the common sizes on your vehicle. It's also worth adding in a few extra things into the toolkit. I have a little bag of random nuts and bolts in case something falls off my vehicle, and zip ties. You can fix pretty much everything with zip ties. Something I learned really early on is using soft tool bags and tool rolls really helps in saving space and in organization. I keep all my wrenches and screwdrivers in a tool roll, and then I have different colored bags within my main tool bag for different sockets or for the nuts and bolts. You'll also want to take a jack with you. Whatever you end up getting, just make sure it's big enough to lift the vehicle. I personally have a small floor jack that I use. It doesn't take up a lot of space inside. I know a lot of people who use high lift jacks. High lift jacks can be used to change tires. Apparently high lifts say that you shouldn't use it for lifting to change a tire, but I know a lot of people do it. But high lifts have other uses as well, and you can use them in recovery. Just make sure you do it safely. I take 2 first aid kits with me. One of them I consider to be my non-emergency first aid kit. I've got a lot of over-the-counter stuff in there, so things that can help with small cuts, headaches, stings, poison ivy, that kind of thing. My other first aid kit is one that I consider to be for life-threatening injuries, ones that's going to help with major bleeding and major emergencies. What you need to do though is make sure you know how to use the stuff in your first aid kit before you go out. Everything that you carry is entirely useless if you don't know how to use it. Another piece of emergency equipment that I actually carry in my daily driver as well is a fire extinguisher. I have a couple of them in my off-road vehicle, and I recommend you do too. That way, if a small fire does start, you can put it out before it gets out of control. You do not want to be the person that starts a forest fire. If you've made it this far, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. That helps me, it helps YouTube promote it to more people, and check out some of my other trip videos.